Hi, I'm Kate.
And I'm Theresa.
And this is Book Chat. We are two sisters-in-law who love to read books, and we're inviting you along to book club. Like book club, there will be spoilers. So before we start, just keep that in mind.
Yes, this week we are actually reading two children's literature books. We read the book Anastasia, The Last Grand Duchess, and then When Christmas Comes Again, which is a World War I book about Simone Spencer. So we're really excited because these are actually childhood favorites for both Kate and myself.
So to start off, I wanted to go into a little bit of history about the Dear America and the Royal Diary series, because both of these books are part of a larger series, but can be read standalone. If you were probably a young girl in the late 90s, early 2000s, you may remember these books. They were quite popular to be checked out at the library, I remember. And I even belonged to a book club where I got one of the Royal Diary books once a month. You may not know these books because they are currently out of print. The Dear America series has about 35 books published, and they were published between 1996 to 2004, and then again from 2010 to 2014. And they follow fictionalized young women who are not real, but they do make up what maybe a young woman would be experienced during a pivotal part of American history. For instance, the one we're reading is about World War I, so it depicts a fictional girl during World War I. She's a little bit older than a lot of the others, but most of them were children between 13 and 16. And then from the Dear America launched several different franchises, one of which was the Royal Diary series, and these are actually based upon real life characters, princesses who existed, and these are just their fictionalized diary entries. They're not real. We don't have journals or diaries of these real women, but the authors fictionalized their childhood so we could get a sense and being immersed in their world.
And then there's also the My Name is America series.
Which includes boys, because the Dear America series and the Royal Diaries are all girls. And then there's also a series for younger readers.
Okay, I didn't know that.
I did not know that either. I learned about that this week.
And then a few years ago, I was in Canada and I learned that they have a Dear Canada series. And I don't know if there's a boy version, but one of my favorites growing up was the Titanic Dear America. And I bought actually the Titanic from the Canadian side.
Oh, really?
Yes. And then I also bought a book that was The War of 1812, which affects Canada a lot. And that's a war that a lot of people are pretty unfamiliar with. So that one was pretty interesting. I enjoy the fact that this Dear America is sort of spread out. It's not just here. Other countries have also taken it on. I don't even know if it originated here.
It did originate here
Okay.
with a popular children's author at the time.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes sense. Right. I think the first one that I ever read was the Mayflower one. Remember Patience? What was her name?
Remember Patience Whipple?
Yes, Remember Patience Whipple. And I think I read that one in like the $8.99. It was a long time ago.
I was reading them when I was very young. One thing to note is these books are not available currently to buy on Amazon. They're very available on thrift books, Etsy, secondhand sellers. I found a ton of them at my Goodwill, which I was thrilled about. But I did note in my research that they're going to be re-releasing some of them for the anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. So that's fun.
That is fun. That's really fun. And hopefully a new generation can enjoy them.
Yes, because they're very good. And I know when I was that age, I really enjoyed like diaries and journal series.
Me too. Me too. As ever, we have a structure to this where we're going to have some questions, and Kate and I are going to each take turns asking them. But before we get started, we are actually going to do summaries of the two books that we read this week.
Yes, and we're going to start with Anastasia because her book is a little earlier in time, although it spans a greater amount of time than Simone's. In Anastasia, we meet a young 13-year-old who is the daughter of the Tsar of Russia. She, along with her sisters, is given a diary. We read her journal entries and learn of her lavish life with her family prior to World War I, and then follow her as Russia enters the war, her father abdicates the throne, and she is ultimately exiled. The diary ends as 16-year-old Anastasia and her sisters are ordered to a new place in confinement where we know from history she and all of her family is eventually murdered right after she turns 17.
So for the summary of When Christmas Comes Again, the World War I Diary of Simone Spencer by Beth Seidel Levine, we did choose these two books because they're around the same era, and we want us to sort of compare the different perspectives of what's going on during World War I from two very, very different areas and from people living very different lives. Simone is living in New York with her family. She is 17 years old when the book begins. At the beginning of the book, the United States has just joined World War I in 1917. During the book, she is trying to figure out what she wants to do after she graduates high school and how she can possibly help the war effort. Simone is bilingual, speaking both English and French, thanks to her mother, who was born and raised in France before marrying her American father. This leads to an opportunity to go overseas and become a radio operator, translating French into English and vice versa. Throughout the book, we experience Simone going through hardships, watching a close friend die, fall in love, and change in ways only a war can change someone. The book ends happily with her being back home for Christmas with her family and her new love after the end of the war.
So definitely a contrast there from Anastasia. Anastasia did not end happily.
We're going to jump into the questions here, starting with the very first and most obvious question. Kate, did you like the books?
Yes, I did, especially Anastasia. I remember enjoying Anastasia quite a bit as a young girl.
Me too.
I found the story quite romantic. It was interesting reading them as an adult versus I probably last read them when I was maybe around middle school age, maybe a little earlier. And at that point, my favorite was definitely Anastasia and probably one of my favorite of all the Royal Diaries series. So it was interesting reading it again as an adult. I did notice that I wanted more, though, of the history that Anastasia could provide. But it made sense because she is a young girl experiencing the war and her father's abdication and all of that through the eyes of a girl who they're trying to shelter.
Right.
So
absolutely.
It's very realistic in that sense. And I also enjoyed When Christmas Comes Again. That was one I had not read as a child that I remember. Okay. So I really enjoyed learning new things about World War I. As Theresa and I chatted before this episode, World War I is not a war that's easy to understand. And I feel like it's not as well known as World War II. So I had no idea that radio operators like Simone existed. They're called Hello Girls. So I really enjoyed learning about that part of the war. What about you?
I'm with you when it comes to Anastasia. I loved Anastasia as a kid. I think I bought that book right after it was published, and I have distinct memories of staying the night at my grandma's house and reading it until I was done with it. I didn't put it down. I loved it so much because I'm with you. It was very romantic because she's living this life that I can't quite comprehend. It's sort of out of my realm of reality in any way. She's living in these gilded palaces, not just one, multiple gilded palaces. She's always talking about diamonds and rubies and
Elephants.
these lavish and elephants, and they're eating elaborate dinners and going to balls, and she's speaking multiple languages. So that one was one of my favorites. I definitely read that one over and over again. In fact, I think this is my original copy, and wow. It is well loved. It is the gold is starting to come off of the corners because I've read it so many times.
Yes, that was one thing I loved about these growing up is they have these gilded sprayed edges, and it felt very special.
Yes, I loved Anastasia. I do enjoy Simone. I do like that she's older. That's something that you don't see a lot in the different diary series, but I had read this one before. I just didn't remember it until I think I was in the first entry, and I was like, oh, she speaks French. I've read this one before. It was so long ago that it was pretty fresh. Overall, Anastasia's still probably going to be my favorite of those two books, of the Royal Diaries. Anastasia's maybe at the top, but I also really liked Cleopatra growing up. So
I don't remember much about Cleopatra, so that might be one we'll have to.
It's historically wildly inaccurate, but I loved it.
Next question. Disregarding what the author or publisher says, what age range would you put the two books in?
So for Anastasia, I would say probably around 8 to 14 years old. It's a pretty heavy topic, but it's about the age most girls are when they're first learning about Anastasia. So you can immerse them without making it too dark. You know, she's the age of the reader. She's going to be experiencing life with the attitude of a preteen, you know?
Yes.
And I think that's an appropriate age range for the readers. When it comes to Simone, I did give a slightly older age range because, one, she's older. So I said 10 to 14. But one of my reasons for that is watching her friend die. And she's really close to the battles, and that's pretty traumatic for her. And then one of the other things is the romance story. What 8-year-old should be reading romance stories?
Right. I thought this one was very different in that it had that aspect because most of them don't.
Right. So what age range did you put them at?
I agreed with you around Anastasia. I would say it's about a middle grade novel because some history of Anastasia is nice before you begin reading the book.
Right.
I think it enriches it knowing that she doesn't survive. So you're reading about the downfall of her family and her, and knowing the ending, I think actually helps with that. And you're covering Anastasia, World War I for the first time about that age. So I think it's a middle grade, late elementary, early middle school novel. And then for Simone, I said middle school to early high school.
Okay. Yeah.
And mostly because she's older and she does experience some things like you mentioned. The subject matter is written in a way that it's not too detailed, but it does cover some really heavy topics. I felt like that could get a little heavy for an 8-year-old.
Absolutely. And she is going off and doing things that an 8-year-old simply couldn't do, right? She is a teenager going overseas to work in a war zone.
She's an independent grown woman.
Yes, exactly. She is. She is.
Is this a good book for adults to read? Can adults learn anything from these books? What do you think?
Absolutely. Yes, both of them. Because as we mentioned, we're probably going to continue mentioning, World War I is a complicated topic, and it's good introduction to it, and it gives you the perspective of somebody who's living in the time period. So, and they're also confused. In Simone's book, she's confused and she's asking her dad, what is World War I? What is going on here? And she's trying to have him explain it to her, and there is some good explanations in Simone's book. So I think that would be good for adults, and I think it's also a good way for maybe an adult who has an inquisitive child and they have somebody who's asking a lot of questions, and they have this book that has a good way of answering them. So maybe a child that isn't quite old enough to read them yet, but they've read this book and they can sort of maybe answer some of the questions. I think that's a good reason for an adult to read these books. What did you think?
I agreed, especially for Simone's book, because it's just like a very bare bones explanation of why we entered World War I, especially America. So I thought it was a great a leaping off point for an adult into a World War I history, because it made me more interested in World War I and wanted to kind of research and learn some more. Anastasia's, I was a bit more iffy about, because I feel like so much of it is fictionalized, because we have to fictionalize it, right? We don't really know what was going through 13-year-old Anastasia's mind. I felt that there was probably some inaccuracies that an adult would maybe serve better to read about Anastasia in another book.
I do think that Anastasia is good bare bones stuff, though, for World War I. So you have...
Yes, that's true. Especially for the Russia portion, which seems very complicated.
Right. So you have Archduke Ferdinand getting assassinated by a Serbian, and Russia is allies with Serbia. So Austria wants to declare war on Serbia. Russia reacts in kind. They're Serbia's allies. So as I'm saying it is pretty complicated, but the book actually does a pretty good job of explaining it.
Anastasia refers to them as cousin and like this family member and this family member.
Gosh, all of the royalty in Europe at that time is related to each other. It's absolutely insane because her parents are cousins or second cousins.
Some sort of cousins, which makes a lot of sense because Anastasia's brother, Alexei, has a genetic disorder, hemophilia.
And that was passed down through Queen Victoria.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because her mother was related to Queen Victoria, which is important to note because throughout the book, they really were hopeful that the English would come in and rescue them.
Yes. Yeah. They don't. Spoilers.
No. Spoiler for history.
Is this like any other book you've read before, either children's YA or adult?
Well, as an older adolescent and middle schooler, I really sought out any book that has to do with diaries, journal entries. And I remember at that time there were a lot of them
Mhm.
available. There was like Amelia's notebooks, I think, or something like that, and they were really fun. Then of course we have the famous Princess Diaries. There were a lot of books at the time that were diary, journal entries, and then of course I had read many of the Dear America books and many of the Royal Diary books. So over time, and I still enjoy a book that has journaling and letters.
When I was a kid, yes, they were everywhere. All these diary books. It's called epistolary writing.
Yes, I learned that word from you.
I knew the word for the longest time, and today I struggled so hard to figure out how to pronounce it because I've known this word for a while. How do you pronounce it? Um, so, anyways, that means that they're documents rather than a story, where it's letters or it's a diary. And one of the books that I've read it as an adult was the Potato Peel Pie Society. Oh, what is the name of that
Oh,
book? You know,
I know what you're
what?
talking about.
Yes,
It's very popular and it's supposed to be very good.
the movie's okay. The book is so good, and it's a series of letters, and it's post World War II. It's just absolutely fantastic. So that's one of the books that I think of when I think of epistolary. We did Jane Austen last week, and some of her early work is
Mhm.
epistolary.
Which
So
there's your vocab word for you
there's your
for the
vocab
week.
word. Yep.
Epistolary.
I'll put it on the screen too, so you know how it's spelled, and you can see if you can wiggle that into a conversation. I think one of the reasons the diary style novel is good is because they're often short, so you don't have to feel like you have to get through a chapter. If you're just not feeling it, you can read one entry. One
Yes.
day, that's it. You're good to
Yes.
go. And maybe that one entry is going to help you keep moving on and keep reading through the book. And I think
Mhm.
that could be important for some reason, especially young readers, who aren't big on chapter books yet.
Exactly. And I think this is a good moment to insert here is if you're in a reading slump, go back to a childhood favorite. Go back. If you liked the Royal Diaries or Dear America, go back to a childhood favorite and read that. It absolutely counts as reading.
I do it all the time. I have every single Royal Diary, thanks to Kate. Kate got me my one that I was missing. Over the years, when I feel like I'm in a reading slump, I grab one, and it takes me a couple of hours to read through it. It's not very hard reading. It's pretty fast, but then I feel like I've accomplished something and I feel better, and then I'm good to go read something else.
Exactly. So that's the great thing about children's books. Children's
Yes,
books are a great form of literature.
they are. They absolutely are. All right. Was the plot intriguing, and did it draw you in?
For Anastasia, yes, it did this time as much as it did when I was a kid. Because, first of all, her lifestyle, you're immediately thrown into her lavish lifestyle because she's, I believe, 13 at the beginning of the book. So they haven't yet entered World War One. So they're still living like the Tsar of Russia lived at that time in their, as we've mentioned, their palaces and their yacht and their summer palace and things like that. And she'd just been to a grand ball, and it's just fascinating. I think especially as that little girl still in me is like, oh,
I know.
royalty.
It's so exciting, and you just sort of want to experience it.
Yes. And then also knowing her fate kind of adds another element because you know this is all going to go away. So you want to keep reading. In Simone's book, I thought the plot was pretty much immediately intriguing because there was not much time before Simone was writing about the war. So you're thrown in pretty quickly into World War One and you're wondering what's going to happen to Simone. Simone is wondering what's going to happen to Simone.
It's true.
That's a big theme in the book where she is seeking some sort of adult occupation, the next step after high school, which is kind of how she ends up becoming a hello girl radio operator. So I was immediately intrigued because you're thrown into World War One just so quickly.
Yes, I actually have pretty much the exact same answers for both of them. Anastasia's lifestyle is so fascinating. So yes, I'm immediately drawn in when I read that book every single time. I love when she puts on a play about the ball and she introduces the guy that steps on everyone's toes while they're dancing. And she gets people from around the palace because everyone lives in the palace, and she gets them to be her audience. And then Simone, it was very interesting because, yeah, she's this 17-year-old, and I enjoy the back and forth in that one where she's like, oh, the war is happening, and then she's got some girly 17-year-old drama happening with her best friend, and they're trying to get themselves together to graduate, and then she's trying to figure out what she wants to do after graduation, and she tests some things out. So that one, I think both of them will just draw you in. and
Yes.
you'll want to read what's going to happen next, what's going to be the next journal entry.
Did you find any plot holes or parts of the plot that didn't make sense to you?
I'm going to say no. I wasn't really searching for them either because they are kids' books. And I'm not going to, I don't really feel like pulling at that thread because I feel like a book that's super, super simple has the potential of having giant plot holes. And they are simple books because they're for children.
Right.
But overall, no, I didn't find any plot holes in them. Did you?
No, I didn't. I mean, there are gaps in the diary as like
Yes.
Simone does not write every day, for instance, but
Right.
you don't feel like you're missing anything because one thing I feel like the Royal Diaries and the Dear America series do really well is even though the dates might not be consecutive, because like any person who's journaling your diary or writing in a diary maybe doesn't journal or diary every day,
Right.
they do a really good job of summarizing what has happened leading up to that time in a very short sentence or two. So I didn't find any glaring plot holes. I mean, the book is simplified. The history of World War One, the history of the Russia's influence in World War One, but that's to be expected because it is a children's book.
One of the things that I enjoy, especially about Anastasia's book, is that if there are gaps in dates, she'll have an entry with 2 sentences and it's just her emotions, and you get the idea, yeah, things are going bad. And that's all that you need, and you don't feel like you're missing anything. Children's books are usually shorter, and sometimes the pacing can be quick. Was the pacing too quick for this?
Thought for Anastasia, the pacing was done very well. Actually, it's the longer of the two books, so
Oh yeah, by quite a bit. Wow.
but quite a bit, yeah. And I thought the pacing was very well. You were able to see Anastasia's world change over time as she got older and as her family was exiled, as her father abdicated, as they were made to leave the palace. So I thought the pacing was done very well. It kept me engaged and interested. For Simone's book, I thought sometimes the pacing was almost a little too quick. It felt like it didn't feel like a plot hole, but it just felt like we were speeding through that war so fast because she had to get home for Christmas.
Right? Oh my gosh, that is so funny because I wrote for Simone's, this one felt a little too quick. Because she's just trying to figure out how she can help the war effort. As soon as she's in France, she's barely writing and just kind of skips around, and she has these teeny tiny little entries, and then every once in a while she has a really long one, and it usually
Yes.
involves the guy that she's into. Kind of unnecessary to the plot. I get it. She gets her happily ever after in the end. She would have been pretty happy if she could just been home with her family at Christmas with her brother there.
I did not understand the need to add the romance element to the story. Who were the main significant characters for these books?
Okay, so these are the significant characters that I have. I have obviously Anastasia. Of course, it's Anastasia. Then I have her family. I do have Rasputin on there. So that's
Yes, I do as well.
Father Grigory, and then just the family, friends, doctors, and servants that are constantly around that she's constantly mentioning. I don't mention them because I'm confused by them. A
Same.
bunch of them have the name Olga, and I cannot keep them straight.
Yes.
So, but definitely her family and Rasputin, because Rasputin is around quite a bit.
And do we want to explain a little bit about Rasputin?
Sure. So Rasputin to the Romanov family was a holy man. So he comes into the family, and Alexei, Anastasia's younger brother, that has this bleeding problem, it is believed that Rasputin is healing him. Anytime he has an injury, this hemophilia can cause severe injuries because he has thin blood. His blood can't clot. So if he has an injury like a sprained ankle, the blood just pools and it's very, very painful. And whenever Rasputin comes into the home, this is a lot of this you can get from the book. Rasputin comes into the home and Alexei's suddenly doing better. And it's because Alexandria Romanov believed in him so strongly that she eventually starts using him as an advisor during the war. When Nicholas Romanov goes off to be with the troops, he pretty much leaves Alexandra in charge of Russia, and she's using Rasputin as an advisor, and he's telling her, fire this person, do this. So in the end, the people of Russia really hate Rasputin because they see the influence that he has over the royal family. And he was bad news. He was bad news from the get-go before he even met the royal family. He was not some holy man. He does end up getting assassinated, which was probably for the best.
And I read that the reason Alexei seemed to get better when Rasputin visited him, because there was, I think, documented improvement
Hmm.
is there's suspicion that he did some sort of hypnosis or something like that
Hmm.
that helped Alexei relax and helped with the pain.
Hello, everyone. This is editing Theresa popping in here because there's a few things that I want to add about Rasputin. In the book of Anastasia, we see that Rasputin is coming around a lot. He is there to take care of Alexei. Alexandra believes in him absolutely. Now, how is it that Alexei is doing better whenever Rasputin arrives? There are a few theories behind why he did better, and it could be a combination of all of them or some of them. It could be none of them. We just aren't entirely sure. I just wanted to throw in a little context and a little bit of history. So, as we mentioned, Alexei has hemophilia. And with the hemophilia, his blood fails to clot when he is injured. Now, unfortunately, what his personal physicians, what his doctors were doing to treat him at this time, and this is going to help with the pain, is give him aspirin. And aspirin is a blood thinner. So when somebody already has thin blood, giving him aspirin is just going to make it worse. So it is a theory among historians that when Rasputin would arrive, he would throw the doctors out of the room. And by doing this, they are no longer able to give him aspirin. And without the aspirin, his blood is going to clot just a little bit, and that is going to end up helping in the long run. Another theory is that Rasputin would wait for a while before he would actually show up, waiting until probably around the time that Alexei would actually start to feel better. Another idea is that Alexandra herself was in such a panic. It's known that she had severe anxiety. Rasputin would come, he would calm her down, and in turn, this would calm Alexei down. I'm sure he is seeing his mother panic, and this is causing some stress on him as well. And when he would calm down, this would help make him feel a lot better. So these are some of the ideas that you can think about when you're reflecting on the Romanov family, Rasputin, and this book. Thank you for coming to my Rasputin TED Talk. So that is Rasputin in a very clean nutshell. If you want to learn more about him, I recommend learning about him on your own time because there's a lot to that man and it's not pleasant.
Yeah. So, which it makes sense it wasn't included in the book.
Yes.
He's a peripheral figure that Anastasia doesn't like.
She doesn't like him. So do we know how she actually felt about him? No.
No.
I don't think we do, but her mom definitely worshipped the ground he walked on. Then for the second book, for Simone, obviously Simone's the main character. And then I would also include William, her brother, because her motivation for helping during World War I is often going back to picturing William in these different situations, and she wants to help him. She wants to make sure that boys like him are being helped. And then, of course, Sam, her love interest, is a pretty main character near the end. Alice, that she meets in France, she is a fellow translator, radio operator translator, who ends up dying. And then her best friend, Francie, I think is a pretty significant character.
Yes.
I like the contrast between Simone and Francie.
Yeah, I did too. I felt that was good.
And then this is going to be really off the wall. This isn't a main character, but I think he's significant. Thomas.
Yes, I included him as well.
Yes. So those are the characters of significance. How about, did you have anybody that I didn't have?
I can't remember her name, but the physical therapist in the hospital, because
yes,
Simone ends up becoming a physical therapist partly by the influence of the work that she sees this woman do with Thomas, who is an injured soldier, and she helps him regain his health and walk again. And then she works with this woman again when she's helping her love interest, Sam Cates, recover. So, and it inspires her to become a physical therapist. They weren't called physical therapists at the time, though. They were called something rehabilitation, I think. Yeah, it was this World War I read was when physical therapy really became a profession and an important part of the healthcare system.
That's very interesting. World War I was a devastating war because of the type of warfare that's introduced. With the trench warfare and the chemical warfare, excuse me. It was really, really very devastating. People were coming home without their faces and missing limbs, and it was just awful. So the medical care that they received was going to be very important. So it makes sense that they're starting to come up with new
And that medical care kind of evolved, which I'm very thankful for because a good physical therapist is
very
so
important.
valuable. Teresa, did you find the characters relatable?
Yes and no, because I can't relate to anything that they're going through. I can't relate to what the lifestyles that they're living. I didn't live in that time period. So in that way, no. But yes, in the way that I thought that they were written pretty realistically.
Yes.
Anastasia is a preteen at the beginning of the book, and she's kind of sassy. She knows that she upsets her mom all the time, and she sort of lives for that. She likes to use the word bosom to upset her older sisters, and she's just sort of this riot. She's really funny. I do find Anastasia's book pretty funny,
Yes, it
which
is.
which is kind of a wild thing to say. But and then Simone, the whole her trying to figure out what she wants to do with herself after high school, I think that's very relatable. I definitely relate to her wanting to do something for the war effort and what can I do? What can I do? And I sympathized with her struggle with being a woman. And
Hmm.
you have her best friend Francie, who is all about the suffragist movement, which I think was fantastic. I'm glad that they added that element to the story. She's trying to get votes for women, and Simone, I think, in the back of her mind, can kind of be like, well, men are doing all of these things, including voting, and I want to be able to do something as well. What can I do as a woman who doesn't really have the rights that a man does at this time period?
Hmm.
How about
Yes.
you? What do you think?
Yes, I definitely related a lot with Simone's what do I do with my life? I mean, I think that's probably more relatable as an adult than it would have been even as a kid.
That's so true.
So, I definitely related with that. One thing I thought that was interesting that the authors included in the book about Simone is that they made a point of saying that she was a girl of some means. So when she met soldiers and other hello girls overseas, she really at one point failed to empathize with them and understand what they were going through. And she grows and evolves and realizes she did have privilege of some sort.
Yes.
So I thought that was a really interesting point in the book. Anastasia, she has compassion for people and her servants, and she seems to genuinely love them. But she does maintain this sort of step above because she's taught from a very young age that the royal family is above the peasants, and as she
Right.
calls them, and things like that. So it did also make sense what happened to Anastasia's family
You're
because of
right.
they were instilled this attitude from a very young age.
It's like the French Revolution. You get a little history and you're like, I get why they beheaded them, okay?
Yeah, exactly. So not right, but kind of
But
understandable.
I get it.
Yeah. So I found both of them difficult to relate to in that way because both of them were probably wealthier in a different class than I grew up.
In Simone's book, she's talking about Millionaires Avenue. I think that's what it's called in New York, which is a real place where mansions are were standing in New York, and it was a really big thing during the Gilded Age. Now she's about 20 years after the Gilded Age, but she still seems to run in those circles of
She
those
does,
people.
yes.
Actually, this comparison I thought was really interesting. So her in Simone's book, her and her friend are out shopping, and her mom doesn't, I think it's her mom, maybe it's her dad, doesn't want her just wandering around. So her chauffeur, Max, is driving behind them
Yes.
and following them to make sure that they're safe. And in Anastasia's book, she wants to go out and shop. And I think it's her aunt or her godmother says, no, you're
You're a
royalty. You
grand
don't
duchess.
you don't do that. Other people shop for you, honey, basically.
Yes,
So
exactly.
I thought
So,
that was so interesting.
and the chauffeur created a point of contention during Simone's training when
Yes.
she was trying to relate and make friends with the other girls, and they just wanted nothing to do with her because they thought of her as a spoiled rich girl.
She would walk herself to training, but it was dark when she was done, so her dad had the chauffeur come and pick her up.
I'm sure that created a divide
Yeah.
already.
Yeah, and I don't think up until that point she ever seemed to realize that she was so privileged.
I don't even think she realized it then. I think she realized it later in the book when she's having a discussion with Sam.
When she has a discussion with Sam and he's so appalled at her, I think that really drives it home. And then later on, she meets Alice and then she learns about Alice's life. And Alice, comes from a poor family with a bunch of children and it really contrasts her life and what she has personally gone through. And then she finds further contrast in Sam, who was an orphan. She's just really realizing that the world is so much bigger than her, and there's a lot of people living different lives out there. And I'm not sure Anastasia ever came to that conclusion, because Anastasia, there's us, the Romanovs, and then there's everybody else, and they're all equal, and
She
then
was
there's us.
never really given the opportunity because she wasn't allowed to interact with anyone else. I still think Anastasia, at least the Anastasia in their book, really believed the Romanovs were appointed by God, mandated to be head of Russia, and then there was everyone else.
And then there was everyone else. What scenes in the book would you return to and read again?
My favorite moments in Anastasia's book were the many traditions Anastasia's family had, such as her mother being given a Fabergé Easter egg every year, and their springs in Crimea and their time on their family yacht. It gave a lot of insight into what her life was like before World War One started and her father abdicated the throne. I think it's still the little girl in me. I really loved reading about that lavish, romantic lifestyle. As for Simone, my favorite moment was when she discovered the soldier that she fell in love with was at the same hospital she was helping at. I just thought that was a really neat moment. Maybe not a realistic moment, but a really cool one.
Yes. For me, Anastasia, I'm going to have to agree with you. I enjoy reading about their lavish lifestyle. I'm not sure there's a specific scene in the book that I would go back and read. It's more like a time period in the book when the book starts to write about the time World War One starts that I would
her
read.
life drastically changed.
Yes, it does. They don't travel nearly as much. Her mom and her sisters become nurses. That first portion of the book I really enjoyed. And I think part of it is because they're happy. Are they living in reality with the rest of the world? No, but they're happy. And I think that's so nice. But in Simone's book, I also would return to the scenes with Sam. I think as a young girl, if I was 13 reading this book, I would have loved the scenes with Sam. It's because it was just so sweet, it's so romantic, it's so innocent. I do enjoy that they argue a little bit. That's so realistic. Young me would have definitely enjoyed this little romantic angle. I like that the whole book isn't a romance because I'm not a romance reader, but I do enjoy that little insert of it. It was cute.
So were there some specific quotes that you felt were really significant or that you liked?
I'm actually not going to do a lot of Anastasia's because when I started doing hers, I was really sad. So the first one is tomorrow is my birthday, the day everything will change. And then
I wrote that down too.
And then follow up is that every year on her birthday, she's like, this isn't the way that I want things to change. This is not what I meant when I meant things to get better. And I thought that was really sad. And I do think that's significant. But for Simone's, I thought she had the best quotes, actually.
I thought there were some good ones there too.
For the first one, I have, don't you have to live some stories of your own before you can write them down?
Yes.
Yeah. So she's talking about Emily Dickinson becoming a recluse to write. And she herself is confused by this train of thought from Emily Dickinson. How can you write when you haven't lived? Another one that I liked was, here I thought, without any ties to anyone or any place, I wouldn't feel brave enough to do anything at all in this world. But Thomas feels just the opposite way. So Thomas is this young man that she interacts with in the hospital as a volunteer before she goes over to France. And Thomas has this idea that if he cuts ties with everybody, he can run off and go live his dreams, which he does sort of twice. He runs away and he goes to the war and then later runs away and he becomes a movie star and leaves his family behind twice. What kind of a jerk if you think about it. And she is like, I don't have any motivation to do the things that I love and do if it wasn't for the people around me. And I thought that was, I related to that. Mm-hmm. I did not relate to Thomas running off.
No, I didn't relate to Thomas either.
This last one, there is something in the air. It makes me think that no matter what they say, no one really wins a war.
Yes, I had that one as well.
For the two books, they both consistently talk about the war being over by Christmas. I mean, obviously, Simone's book is called When Christmas Comes Again. So right. that one makes sense. But even Anastasia, and I think just throughout history, that's a thing.
Yes.
Where people will be like, well, the war's going to be over by Christmas, so we'll all be together by Christmas.
In World War One, it was significant because there was a ceasefire on Christmas, a very short time on Christmas Day.
Yes.
Where the soldiers sang, I believe, Silent Night together. across the front lines.
Yes. So German soldiers, Canadian soldiers, French soldiers would climb out of their trenches and they'd play games together and they'd share food. And if they could speak the same language, they would talk about their families. And then after Christmas, they would go back into their trenches and continue fighting each other. From my understanding, too, it was sort of not an agreement.
It wasn't an official agreement. It was just something that organically happened.
Yes. And I think that is it's so chilling to think about, because how can you let your brain work that way? Where one minute you're a pal, one minute you're fighting each other, the next minute you're a pal, and the next minute you're fighting each other. Like I just can't. It's so hard to wrap my mind around.
It is hard to wrap your mind around. It makes you think that the soldiers really had no problems with each other.
Exactly.
They're
just cogs.
They're cogs in a bigger wheel.
Yes, they didn't have a problem with each other at all.
So I had a few quotes. First of all, there's a quote in Anastasia where she says, they expect to be home by Christmas, referring to the soldiers. So we have that Christmas theme again, and then contrasting that with Simone said, when Christmas comes again, we shall all be together and the world shall be a safer place. So like we talked about, Christmas is this very big marker for both of them. But for Anastasia, I found a lot of quotes that kind of foreshadowed what was going to happen to them.
Mm-hmm.
One of them, Olga, one of the Anastasia's older sisters, I think the oldest, she found in her diary, because Anastasia was constantly looking at her sister's diaries, that Olga had written, I am a Russian and will remain a Russian. I will never leave my country, even if it means I do not marry.
Yeah, that probably was her death sentence right there. She probably could have married and gotten out of there.
Exactly. Another one that I noted, and again, you noted this as well, is every day on her birthday, she'd be like, things will change. Things will change. Mm-hmm. Well, on, I think her last birthday that we cover in the book, tomorrow's a day that everything will change. What I meant is that everything would get better, because things did change, just not in the way that they were supposed to.
Yeah. And as a teenager would expect, like when I said change, I didn't mean bad. Come on.
And then my last Anastasia quote actually is from the epilogue, where the author was writing about the real history of Anastasia and her family and what we know. And she said, history views Alexandra, Anastasia's mom, as a lonely, frightened woman who listened to the wrong advice, Rasputin's. Nicholas is remembered as a weak ruler, a kindly man who listened to bad advice, his wife's. And I felt that was very much a good summary of the introduction to what happened to the Romanovs.
I think one of the things that's really unique about Nicholas and Alexandra is that they are deeply in love with each other.
Yes.
So they sort of are blinded by that almost a little bit. And they really do go to each other a lot. And as a ruler, he probably should not have been going to his wife as much as he did for advice or whatever is going on. They're such a unique family. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, very much so. We have a few kind of more fun questions for these next ones. What was your reading setup?
Okay, so for Anastasia, because I've read it so much, I would just read an entry here and there every once in a while. And I got through it really quickly because I have read it so much that I just buzzed right through it. But when it came to Simone's, I had gone to bed one night and I was going to read just a few entries before I went to sleep. And I ended up staying all night and reading the entire thing. It didn't take long, but it was still later than I intended because it was already late for me. So that was my reading setup. How about you?
I read Simone first, but I had to order this one from thrift books because even though I found multiple the Dear America books at my Goodwill just recently, and I remember when I found them, I texted Theresa and was like, look what I found. And then I went back like the next week and found lots of the Royal Diaries. So
somebody's getting rid of their collection, it seems.
I know. And I was like, where's the rest of them? Because mine have been lost, unfortunately. So when I read Simone, I read it over a period of just one day, like a majority of it in one sitting. In Anastasia, I read the book very, very quickly over a few hours, actually over 2 days.
Also, a couple of things to note. It is really easy to find, well, if you're in a bigger city like I am, a lot of these at your local library. So, because mine came from, Simone's came from the library. This is going back. And I also found some of them, not all of them, are also audiobooks. So if you're not a reader, but you like to listen, there are some that are audiobooks as well. So just something to keep in mind for audience who like to consume their books in different ways. All right, Kate, what music gave you the same feelings as these books?
So for Anastasia, I think of the music. I think of a song from the movie Anastasia, which Teresa and I talked about is actually not a Disney movie, for those of you who were wondering. But it is on Disney Plus, so if you want to watch it. And it actually takes place after like the events of this book would have occurred, with the assumption that Anastasia survived. We know now she did not. Like, I think it's been proven by history that she did not survive. But the song Once Upon a, is it September or December?
December, which actually makes it more significant with this whole Christmas thing.
Yes, it ties it in, doesn't it? So
It does.
Once Upon a December from the movie Anastasia. And then for Simone, there's this kind of cheesy group called Celtic Thunder, and I thought of their song called Christmas 1915, which sings about the ceasefire in the trenches. So again,
Okay.
kind of another Christmas tie-in
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, there is. That's funny. Yeah, so I hope the audience doesn't come at me. My sister probably will. I thought of the soundtrack from The Hunt for the Red October, which is a Soviet Union movie about submarines. It's one of my sister's favorite movies, and we listened to that soundtrack a lot growing up, and we watched that movie a lot. It's much further after Anastasia, but it's Russian, so that was what was playing in my mind. I'm sorry, Russia. And then for Simone, it's also the wrong era, but I don't know 19 teens music. So for her, it was big band era.
Mm-hmm.
When she was at home, when she was in America, I was thinking big band because she kind of does live this Gilded Age
Yes.
lifestyle a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But when she was in France, I didn't think of any music whatsoever. I just nothing came to me.
No, it seems a very
Serious.
Well, she was on the trenches, so I don't think a lot of music was occurring, which makes the events of 1915 and the fact that they're real all the more significant, I think.
Yeah. For both of these books, what would you rate them?
I gave When Christmas Comes Again a 7.
Oh my God, me too. Me
Did
too.
you?
Yes.
Oh, what did you
That's
give
funny.
Anastasia?
I gave Anastasia a 9.5 because I cannot decide if she or Cleopatra is my favorite, but it's one that I have returned to since it was published. I think this was published in 2000, and I have reread it, not every year, but many, many times over the years since it first was published over the past 25
Very
years.
nice.
So, yeah, how about you?
I gave Anastasia a 9.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, because just I feel like it's a very good book for young girls. It resonates as an adult. I feel like it's a very well written middle grade children's novel.
And great for introduction to World War One, the Romanovs, the Bolshevik Revolution, all of that. They have the epilogue in the back, and then they have the history. And when you read those, they're adding a lot of really good information. Like, it sums up things very well and at an age appropriate level. And then there's also, pictures, so you can actually see the actual people. Even with Simone's book, of course, you're going to have summary of World War One in the back, mostly from what's going on with America. And then again, there's going to be pictures, and it's going to show you different things that you maybe haven't seen before, which I absolutely love. So I think they're both good books. I think all of the diary books are just really well done.
I agree. So if you have a daughter who's around this age, or a loved one in your family who's around the age of these books, I would encourage you to encourage them to check them out from the library or return to them yourself.
Yeah, exactly. If you don't want to just buy them outright, if you aren't quite sure about them, definitely start by going to the library and seeing if you like them first. So
yeah, we highly recommend the library.
We do. We definitely recommend the library. And I found out recently that I knew that there was a show. There's a show that has some of the Dear America Diaries, some of the Royal Diaries. Not a lot. I think it went for 2 seasons, and you can rent them from Amazon Prime. So,
which I will be checking out.
Yes, I owned at least 2 of them growing up. I owned Elizabeth and Cleopatra. I believe they were the 2 that I had. Definitely check those out as well. Hello everyone, this is Editing Theresa popping in here just to let you know that our next book that we're going to be reviewing is Such a Quiet Place by Megan Miranda. That's a mystery and suspense. So that will be coming out on March 1st. The description for it will be in the show notes below. We hope everyone has a great 2 weeks because we post every 2 weeks, and we will see you later.
Yes, have a wonderful week.